We're here to talk about the future of arts programming in a world in which there's multiple TV platforms and channels now available. We're going to think about what it might look like, and when consumers have so much choice, how is it possible for arts programming to cut through, and where the opportunities are for new talent and risk-taking formats. So my panel today is Mark Bell, Head of Commissioning for Arts, BBC, Mandy Chang, Head of ABC TV Arts, John Hay, Head of Specialist Factual at Channel 4, and Celia Taylor, Head of Non-Scripted Commissioning for Sky Entertainment. So we're going to begin with everybody showing some clips, and Mark's going to start.
Okay, do you want, shall I just describe them quickly first? I've got 3 short clips of upcoming programmes, just to give you a sense of some of the things we're doing. Hard to encompass the range of programming in that way, but we've got a little piece for BBC 4. It's Vic Reeves on, it's 100 years, roughly speaking, since conceptual art was invented, and Vic Reeves is sort of telling us the story of Dada and its influence on him, so we'll see a bit of that. Michael Waldman's making a film for us about Christie's The Auction House in its 250th year. So we have some fairly unprecedented access to that. The clip is fairly straightforward, but the film's going to be rich, I think. And then we've got a little short clip from a film called B is for Book, which is watching a class of children over the course of a year learning to read, which was made by Century Films and Sam Benstead, the director. So if you just watch those, it's just to give you a sense of the range of things we're doing, and then I'll talk a bit more about it. I think that last clip, you know, I think both the last 2 films show you that, you know, the genres of, you know, of television style is breaking down really, and I think it's important that, you know, arts is taking, you know, telling stories in modes that aren't necessarily traditional, and so we're looking for different styles of authorship really, and I think that finding, you know, that can come from the director as much as it can come from an on-screen presence. We're you know, we're trying different styles of program out really. The last one's going to be part of a series of programs celebrating children's writing across BBC 2 and BBC 4 this summer. We've got a sort of illustrated sort of almost autobiography of Roald Dahl. We've got that, and then in the autumn we're doing some more programs about reading. Do you want me to do a sort of recap of everything we're doing, or do you want to ask questions?
We could probably move on to Mandy, probably, and then we'll come back and talk about the clips.
Okay. Okay, so I'm showing 2 clips. The first one is from the series that we did called The Divorce, which is a comedy opera musical drama, which we stripped across 4 nights at the end of last year. It was 4 half hours, and it was a really interesting experiment because a lot of people came to the first night, and it was really hard to keep them. And we thought, well, maybe we should have done a longer version, a kind of 1.5 hour version, a feature length, and shown it all on one night. But you know, it's a really beautiful kind of luscious performance. It's about a divorce, and written by an Australian composer. The libretto and the music were both written by Australians, kind of at the top of their game. And we had kind of quite a well-known cast, because the idea behind that was to bring people to a musical opera on TV. And then we showed that towards the end of last year. And then the other clip is it's called Mystify, and it's the story of Michael Hutchence. It's a feature-length doco that's a co-pro with the BBC, and we'll probably get into co-pro relationships with other broadcasters as well from around the world, because it's a really big kind of landmark doco, and the guy who's made it has got an incredible archive of footage of Michael made all his videos, and you know, going way back. They had a friendship going way back, so he's got the inside track on Michael's life, and last year there was a TV drama in Australia about the Michael Hutchence story, and it kind of bore no relation to the truth. So this is the real story, and we're doing it Amy style, and this is what we're going to show is just a trailer, but it gives you an indication of kind of the kind of sex appeal that, and the kind of intriguing character that Michael was. So let's have a look.
So we'll return and talk about those more in a minute, but John's going to introduce...
Yeah, it's amazing watching that, isn't it? Someone's reminiscing about going to see him live the other night.
God, he's so gorgeous.
Amazing.
Oh,
Yeah.
Beautiful.
been in love. I was in love with him from
Gets you here.
teenage.
Great, we can count you two as viewers.
Yeah, definitely. I'm in.
Totally in. Right, I've not got a show reel or clips really, because we ended up making a little film I thought might be good to play again here. We made it for the launch of our two biggest recent series, which was Grace and Perry, All Man, and Random Acts. And what it was an attempt to sort of explain our approach. So I'd like to play that again. Now, just to say a couple of words before it, the reason we did it is because we start from the position that our job is to be the alternative channel, and I admire massively lots of the programming on all these other channels, but I think we need to offer something different, and the thing that we've tried to do is to see the world through artists' eyes, by which I mean we don't make programs about artists, we don't make sort of profiles or biographies or surveys of movements. We try and invite artists to be the authors of the programs and to make new work for television and to address the kind of mainstream subjects that we traditionally do we do straight as a 9 o'clock doc. So across the, you'll see work in here from the past and the future, and the kind of subject matter we've hit has been things like going into access to a psychiatric institution and the general election and identity politics in the UK and climate change and the modern factory and masculinity. I mean, there's a sort of, they're absolutely subjects that we do as docs, but we want to see them differently through the eyes of artists and through their process. So there's a sort of mixture of stuff in here. I can talk about some of it as the session goes on, but it's the people we work with explaining what we do.
Celia, you will...
So I've got two clips, and they're quite different. And I suppose it's sort of show the eclectic range that you can have in arts programme, which is part of the joy. So the first one is a show called Computer Says Show, which is made by Wingspan. I think, Archie, I saw you in the darkness out there. Which is just a genius idea, which is basically gets to the heart of creativity. Can a computer be creative? And so we got 3 computers to write a musical for us, and then we actually put it on in the West End. So it was a fantastic, huge undertaking. And it's brilliant because it's really mainstream because it's a musical, but it also actually gets to the actual intellectual heart of creativity. So it's sort of got an intellectual rigor, which has really made it very exciting. And then the second clip is a very, very beautiful documentary which we made about Dante's Inferno. And it's incredibly arty with a capital A, but I think the difference between that and I suppose it's sort of, for me, it's what modern arty should be. It's incredibly beautiful. It's action-packed, it's not slow, it's not indulgent, and it actually is incredibly embracing because it tells you the narrative of an iconic piece of literature, but also how that's influenced artists through the centuries. So it's sort of ancient and contemporary and philosophical and beautiful at the same time. Anyway, so these are the clips, and we can talk more afterwards.
Right, abandon hope.
Yeah.
You enter here.
It's really scary,
It's
actually.
quite
Some
tough.
bits of it are really creepy. If you watch it on your own at night time, you'd be a bit like, oh, God. It's beautiful.
So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, which you've all kind of touched on in the clips that you've done, is kind of the great thing about arts programming is that you are running the spectrum from the mainstream to the esoteric and trying to make things accessible. So I'd just like, if you could, maybe Mark, you could talk about how you are approaching that and maybe some of the ways in which you're changing the formats of programs.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, the BBC has a range of platforms and channels and online with which we can approach arts. I suppose what's happened over the last couple of years is that we've moved away a bit on TV from the number of magazine shows and review programs that we were doing into more authored programs. And that's partly because a lot of the review and, we have magazine shows on radio. The news does a lot of coverage and tells you what's on. And we also have launched BBC Arts Online. So we're covering the sort of what's on and where aspect of our agenda, sort of slightly less on TV, and in order to, and do it elsewhere, give us more space to do more, to have more authorship really on TV. On BBC One, we carry on being hitting the biggest possible number of people with broad mainstream arts programming, so Fake or Fortune and so on, often on Sunday evenings, which we can get 4 or 5 million to. On BBC Two, the plan for us, we're establishing Saturday nights as a sort of cultural destination where we'll have a range of programming looking forward, and I think that will encompass some of the performance things you've seen on some of the other clips. That style of programming combined with documentaries, both presented and otherwise. And it'll be, the nights will feel very different each night, as is the plan. And that's, that's already started, but it'll be, ramped up in the autumn. And then on BBC Four, we're looking to increase the range and variety and sort of sense of authorship in the programs we do there. So possibly getting a slightly more experimental. I mean, using Vic Reeves or Jim Moyer there is one of many flavours. Alongside that, there'll be more serious essays about conceptual art and probably more playful, short-form things around it as well. So there's just a bigger range of authors, range of presenters, range of people who wouldn't necessarily be called presenters normally because they have jobs in the art world anyway, but giving their perspective. So Arts Night on BBC Two does that, obviously, on a regular basis, trying new voices out. And on top of that, we've also increased our online activities. So we have, obviously, the space in partnership with the Arts Council, and we're also looking into a new project called Performance Live, which is a sort of building on something we did called Live from Television Centre, where we put on live theatrical performance as a one-off television experience. So you can see that there's a range there which hopefully will hit as many, both the people who are already interested in arts, the people who are interested in particular forms of art, as well as the sort of people who might be curious but don't realise they are. So sort of, and I think that would include some of the viewers of the BBC One shows. So that's the sort of plan. Is that sort of, does that give you enough?
Yeah, that's a good overview. And John, you touched on the idea that you're trying to do something different in terms of using artists or seeing art through artists' eyes rather than having the sort of critic presenter.
Yes. Well, I mean, I suppose it's interesting, your question about the esoteric and the mainstream. Sort of seems to me what's happening in the culture is there's this kind of explosion of choice, obviously, wonderful in lots of ways, but the danger is you end up with lots of niches and a sort of atomization. And so I just reminds me of I went to have a conversation with someone from one of the big commercial galleries when I took the job. And I said, look, can we do something together? Let's collaborate. And he said, well, I don't know if artists need TV anymore. They've got access to video in lots of ways, right? They can do their own sort of
Everyone's
production.
got their own YouTube channel.
Exactly, and I sort of said, no, but TV's not video. TV's being in everyone's living room at 9 o'clock on a Friday. That's the thing, right? That's what we can do that's different. So the trick is, for us, we've got much less of a range of platforms. We've got All 4, which is a growing platform, but basically the main space to play in is Peak on the main channel. And so how do you play in Peak on the main channel whilst not sort of sacrificing the quality of the art? And that's why we've gone for the route we've gone for, which is to sort of basically think, okay, let's make the subject the hook, right? Let's hit mainstream subjects of the kind that people would turn up for in stories and so on. So if you look at the last Grayson series, it's access to the city, it's embeds with the police doing drugs raids, it's hanging out with cage fighters who are struggling with a sort of male suicide epidemic. These are all sort of mainstream doc subjects. Mm-hmm. And then if the subject's the hook, then the artist has got room, or say artist, I mean musician, dancer, whatever. They've got room to play and be creative, and they can make some quite out there work. Mm. They've got freedom, really, to sort of mix it up and make us see it differently. I mean, the tiny, tiny clip on there of the video simulation is an artist called John Gerard, who makes year-long digital simulations of places that sort of speak to how the world is changing. It is not sort of, you know, safe, easy, mainstream work, but because it's going to be a sort of, you know, part of a sort of broader offering on climate change, I think that will probably sort of, you know, earn its place, you know, right in the middle of our mainstream schedule, and I think that's what our contribution can be.
Interesting. And Mandy, I was interested in your clips because they seem to speak to different ends of the spectrum in that the Hutchins.
So I think, I mean, because we are public service broadcaster, we kind of have a we have a remit to do all that niche stuff, and we want to do all that niche stuff. But there's also a responsibility to get as large an audience as you can to arts programming. So it's really about mixing it up. So earlier this year we did a program called Matilda and Me about Tim Minchin's journey through the musical Matilda, and that did incredibly well for us. It got the biggest audience between the ages of 1 and 24, which is pretty extraordinary for arts, that we've had this year on the ABC. And it was aimed at a broad audience, and because Tim Minchin's such a kind of big figure and such a popular figure, it brought a huge, you know, it was destination family viewing on a Sunday night. But, you know, at the other end of the spectrum, and I'm really interested in John's kind of idea about artists. We've actually been commissioning artists. We've got an initiative called the Hive Initiative, where we take a group of artists who are interested in, you know, making content, and we do this big workshop with them, and we bring in writers and we bring in filmmakers, and then at the end of that we have a kind of pitching thing, and we invite other artists as well. And we've just commissioned 3. We've been running this for 3 years now. Last year we commissioned 2 feature-length. They were pretty much dramas. One was a dance piece called Spear, done by a really kind of very well-known Indigenous choreographer, and that was absolutely beautiful. And then both of those films premiered at the Berlin Film Festival. And the other one was a drama, a kind of coming-of-age story, and I think I showed a clip here last year, but it's set in the 70s, and it's kind of got a disco vibe to it, and it's kind of gorgeous, and it's about this it's a bit Donnie Darko, a bit Heathers, and it's about a girl coming of age and kind of coming to terms with things, but goes into this kind of dark fantasy life. And then this year we've just commissioned 3. 2 of them are half hours, because the feature-length ones we have to put out later, so we're trying to kind of get them more up front in the schedule. One of them's a kind of comedy by this amazing, renowned Australian director who works with disabled actors, and it's called Bunghole, and it's based on the Ship of Fools idea, where they would put all these disabled and mad people on ships and kind of sail them off into, you know, out to certain death, and they're on a mission to plug a kind of nuclear leak, and they realise halfway on the journey that they've been sent to their certain deaths, so they plot revenge. And it's only half an hour, but if it's successful, then we'll look at commissioning a 6-part series, which is what the director wants to do.
So that's quite a lot of kind of risky, experimental,
very risky, yeah.
Commissioning of original work.
Kind of, and I guess talking about the future, Mark and I were talking earlier about the fact that lots of arts institutions are getting into the video. They've got their own video teams, and I think, you know, Celia mentioned it as well. How do we partner up with these people? How do we leverage some of, you know, their experience and expertise, maybe their money, maybe resources in kind, to do things together? And, you know, I'm looking at that more and more in terms of, you know, making projects and working across platforms, and we're looking at doing a big project with the NGV, which is inspired by the 100 works of the Neil McGregor thing.
Oh yeah, History of the World.
Yeah, but an audio-visual version of that, which is taking works out of the National Gallery of Victoria and finding different ways of telling the stories of those works of art, either in the digital space, the TV space, or the radio space, and, you know, whether it's long form or short form, or whether it, you know, the end, and over a period of time, so over a period of 3 years. And the National Gallery of Victoria, one of the most progressive galleries in Australia. The guy who runs it is full of ideas and kind of really open to letting us in. So I think that's the kind of thing that I'm really interested in looking to in the future.
Well, Celia, you mentioned about the same thing about kind of working, you know, if you look at the Royal Academy or the Tate or the big institutions or the museums in Australia, they're all producing their own films, so they could be seen as rivals, but you were sort of saying this.
I mean, I think the good thing is that what it proves is there's a massive hunger for arts content out there. So it's only good news. I don't think that's a problem at all. And I think, you know, the fact that I live in a small town, you know, outside London, and if I wanted to on a Sunday, I could go to my crappy old, you know, cinema with Pizza Hut and car park and what have you, and watch an opera. And I think that's extraordinary. So I welcome all that. I think it's amazing. And I think actually what we've been trying to do, and I think the difference at Sky Arts, so we're a 24/7 arts channel, so it's not about trying to get people to a Friday night slot. So I think we have a slightly different relationship with our viewers because people won't watch an arts channel in the way that they would watch a normal TV channel. So I think we have a very much understanding that, you know, we've got to service the people that love Deep Purple as much as the people that love Dante's Inferno, and a mainstream audience that will actually come to the channel and watch a long series. So I think that's the joy of Sky Arts, is that we have that variety. And also, it's a channel based on subscriptions. So actually, if you are a ballet fan or a classical music fan, the fact that we transmit a lot of that stuff is really, really valuable. And that's maybe what you want in an arts channel. So I think it is that sort of... So the idea that there's an arts viewer is sort of a misnomer, I think, because, you know, I won't watch... You know, we just at Download Festival last week, and I probably won't watch that, but my husband probably would. You know, I probably won't watch a contemporary opera, but my stepdad would. So I think it is sort of encouraging that broadness of offering. And part of that, I think, is really what we have to do. Our main job is to try and make a disturbance in the art world, either with the viewers or in the art world. And I think there's a variety of ways you can make that disturbance. And I think that's one is by, you know, really, really big ideas, like saying actually computers can be as creative as humans. That's sort of an unsettling idea. And that caused a disturbance. But also we put on a show in the West End. And it was amazing, lights and everything, and people bought tickets, and it was really exciting, and we wept and we cheered, and that sort of, you know, and the press took notice of that, and an audience came to that. So, you know, it had a sort of a life beyond as a TV show. And I think partnering with institutions is something that we're very keen on. There's a sort of a practical part of doing that. One is that they have a massive footfall and they have press and marketing teams. And as an arts channel, obviously press and marketing, we don't have a lot. So, you know, if you run Sky Arts, you know, we have to make noise. And so partnering up, so National Portrait Artist of the Year and Landscape Artist of the Year, our partner on that is National Trust. So Landscape Artist of the Year, all the rounds take place in National Trust properties. Yeah. They have a huge mailing list, they have an audience, we have a wild card so visitors can join in. So we can do it like that. We can do it working with big institutions. We're working with the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, with Cause and Instagram. So it's about sort of combining modern technology and place and a contemporary artist together. So there's a whole variety of ways you can do it. And it just, I think, it gives a sort of solidity to the content you're making. It gives it an echo and a ripple effect outside of the broadcast. And I think that's really, all of us are just really excited about engaging an arts audience. And I think, you know, that's part of our job, and I think that's what we all love, that bit of our jobs. And so partnerships and working with external partners is just brilliant. And it's definitely a fun part of it.
I was going to say, I think the work Celia's doing on that, I mean, I know less about what you're up to, Mandy, but and Mark as well, it's quite important to pushing this, I think, a bit, because the and I think it's been really important pioneering work, that, because the conversation with the institutions has been for a long time, you know, we're doing something, would you like to cover it? And you think, yeah, that would be all right, you know? But it'd be slightly more exciting to have a more interesting creative collaboration. And it's not just the sort of, it's what you say, isn't it? It's the logistical, practical bit about amplification of the message. But also, I mean, I often say to institutions, right, you've got a 10-room exhibition, TV is the 11th room, right? What would you put in the 11th room? And then you start to have a slightly more interesting conversation about what they do. And some artists think, it's not for me. And some artists love it and come up with something amazing. But we need to keep pushing, all of us, I think, and moving that relationship forward and making it slightly more creative.
And Mark, do you want to talk a bit about, we were chatting just before we started about the kind of multi-platforms and the fragmenting audiences and how, I mean, is that an exciting opportunity, or is it both? Is it the kind of challenge and threat? Or?
I think it is a challenge. I think across the piece it's a challenge, because I think when galleries such as the Tate make their own content, obviously they get a good footfall, and I think the number of people who go to the Tate on a Saturday compared to the number of people who go to the website to really investigate it, I think are quite different. And I think that the challenge is to try and find ways of getting out to as many people as possible, and to stop. I think it's great that there is lots of content for people who know they already like modern art or opera or ballet, but the sort of clustering that's occurring around interest groups is, I think, something that television is always trying to sort of expand upon, is to encourage people to look out beyond, to the people who might like Deep Purple might also like Dante, and that's why you put it on the same channel, and I think that's what's exciting for us. And so what we're trying to do is make the broad and the narrow appeal to as many people as possible. And I think that the challenge with online is to try and find ways of it being more than just a destination for the people who already know they want to go there, and that's what we think about a lot. I mean, we do the BBC online is a powerful tool and has a lot of reach, and people who come in for the news might also go and investigate other things, but you have to get quite near the top of the, you need to get near the front door of it in order to encourage people to go and investigate further. So we do have arts online, but trying to build that is an interesting challenge. So we have to keep pointing to it from broadcast and elsewhere online to get as many people to it as possible. I think that's the challenge, because otherwise everything becomes niche, and we've become a succession of niches. And I think that the arts is a succession of niches, but it's also a broad approach to life, and I think that that's what's interesting, really.
And do you think there's still a place for criticism in kind of arts programming? Because I feel like there's been a move away from, admittedly, a very sort of old top-down model of the kind of old white bloke standing and sort of telling you what to think about things, to something very different.
But that's the crux of it.
Yeah.
Old white man walking down the street doing piece of camera telling you stuff. It's sort of, we always talk about, watching people do art and create art is by necessity more interesting than watching somebody that's distant from it dictating views to you.
But I love good criticism. I don't think there's enough of it. I think it's really hard to find those people who can.
Wondering if we're losing the sort of criticism in a celebratory kind of.
We're just losing critics generally. Those people often come from writing and from journalism, and I miss that. I mean, I don't miss the old white blokes, and there's still plenty of them anyway. But I think that I think there should be more polemic and more critique and more, assessing of what's out there in the culture. I don't want it just to be hagiography and saying, "Isn't this great?" I'm really, and it's really hard to find, isn't it? I mean.
Yeah, I mean. Look, Robert Hughes is an old white bloke. You made some great films.
He's a great white bloke.
An old great white bloke. So they do exist, but and absolutely they probably there was a lot of that, and it's great that there's more range. But intelligent people saying intelligent things about the arts, whether they're critics or art historians or practitioners, they're all important, and we should be expanding that range, and we should be making sure that it's not owned by a particular sort of section of the population. That's, of course, ridiculous. But so I think we do need to stay broad, but we also need to remember that there's some of the great sort of traditional stars of programming and much loved by people, and we should need, we need to carry on making them too, I think.
It's really interesting kind of looking at Celia's output and John's and Mark's, and how all of them have found different approaches and different ways to find their audience. And, I find that there's space for all of that. There's space for all these different approaches, and it's they're all equally valid and all equally really interesting. And I guess in TV is a busy space for arts, even within its kind of niche programming, and that there are these different perspectives and different ways and different approaches of telling the stories. And I think that's one of the things that kind of marks the more contemporary arts programming, is that we've had to find different ways of telling these stories, of telling old stories in new ways. And, you know, I think all three broadcasters have done that really successfully.
I mean, just to your point about institutions making their own content, it doesn't really feel to me like there's much scrapping and competition. And we're all quite into the arts, right? We're also quite pleased that it's out there in different ways. That's sort of, you know, the point of it all. Just to your point about the critics, I mean, I really like the Valdemar shows that Mark does, partly because I sort of think, you know, if you do it with enough spirit and you're there showing us things on camera, I mean, it's a different, to me, like the way that goes wrong is the sort of really out chunks of your book in front of a castle kind of school of presenter-led programming, right? But like sort of the kind of going and showing me things and pointing is great. But I also sort of think that's fine. That's done there. So what for us, it's more like it's almost like the artist is the critic, sort of the critic of the world, right? So like Grayson going and doing a critique of popular taste or masculinity or whatever. I mean, that function exists in a different way for us.
And I mean, arts hasn't traditionally been kind of where the massive ratings are. So which are the ways in which, how do you judge a success in terms of what you produce? Is it kind of making it part of the cultural conversation, or what are your kind of benchmarks?
I mean, you know, Landscape Artist of the Year is the most successful show we've ever had, and it does brilliantly for us. And we get, and it just brings in a massive audience. It brings in an audience, more importantly, that isn't a constant viewer to the channel. So it's about, I think, so something like that is a massive success for us, because it rates really, really well, and it brings new viewers in. And on the Arts channel, that's great, because while you're there, you might kind of go, oh, did you know? And also I think the word arts is so off-putting for so many people. And it's this sort of weird thing because, you know, and, you know, we've done a bit of research about, you know, what do you think of Sky Arts channel? And it sort of falls into two camps. The sort of, you know, Telegraph reading, opera-loving people kind of go, it's going to be ghastly. And the other section of the people kind of go, oh, arts, it's going to be opera, it's not for me. And then when you actually show both those groups of people, the broadness of the content and the innovation of the content, they're kind of just like, wow, I had no idea. And I think all of us, that, you know, that sort of capital A word can be a sort of a barrier of entry. And I suppose that's really the main battle that we've all got. So I think, and also I think, you know, does arts programming have to be hugely rating? And I think it's so critical for our national health and for our national spirit. And for children, you know, the effect of arts on children, the difference between academic qualifications of children that experience arts. Children who experience arts go on much more likely to have further education than children that don't. So it's like food. So obviously we all want ratings, and obviously we want to do that, but I think there's a bigger job to be done, is to keep it a central part of our conversation, a central part of our culture, and that's why it's brilliant that we all have a remit to do that, even from a commercial end. At Sky's, obviously a very commercial business, we're utterly committed to it. And I think it's brilliant. And so you know, we just got to keep going, and if we make exciting programming, people will come and watch it.
Yeah, I mean, it's true, isn't it? There are lots of axes of success. I mean, obviously there's ratings, there's impact. I mean, you know, there's sort of things being talked about. There's what you were saying about the national conversation. There's awards, that's another one. I mean, there's also, I know we were talking earlier, weren't we? We're now, I think, all of us in some degree doing work that sort of reaches out into the community. So we've got Random Acts, which is our experimental short film strand. It's a partnership with the Arts Council, £6 million over 3 years. Half of that money goes to finding young filmmakers across the country and giving them a chance to make what might often be their first, you know, film for broadcast on 4. You know, that might find the next Steve McQueen. You know, that's the sort of that success to me. You know, so I think we're all judging it on a number of axes, right?
And do you run kind of, well, yeah, you talked a bit about your programs where you're reaching out to artists. Do you run ones for kind of first time?
So we've had 3 years, and we've commissioned probably about 10 artists now to make films, and they're not just visual artists, they're choreographers and they're theatre directors and all writers. We're doing one of the films in that current Hive round is called Guilty, and it's about the Myron Sukumaran, Andrew Chan, the whole kind of death row thing and their execution, and 2 artists went in to teach Myron how to paint. But Guilty is taking the phone calls that Myron made in the last hour before he was executed and getting a writer in to write, doing interviews with the people that he spoke to, getting a writer in to write those conversations and having them performed by actors, and then intercutting it with all the preparations for the execution, but also with all this secret filming that was done with Myron and these two Australian artists, and turning that into an essay that's a kind of meditation on the death penalty and on rehabilitation and the right to take somebody's life. So that's a really kind of heavy duty one, but and again, it's very experimental and innovative. And we also do, we do a lot of one-off, 1 hour authored films, which kind of cover a range, but we put it under a banner. And again, that was inspired by Modern Times and Storyville, because it's a way of kind of not having all these random arts films, but putting them all together under one banner, but that they can be made by different directors with different styles and different voices, and cover that gamut of the arts. And then we do those big landmark series as well, probably 2 or 3 every year.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was your question again? Totally lost track.
We were talking a bit about the other side to accessibility in terms of finding new filmmakers and new people to make.
I mean, we have an
arts
iView
programs.
Arts channel, and we do a lot of experimenting there. I'd like to do more experimenting there. And we commissioned short form stuff. So we did a 6 by 5 minute series about fashion in Sierra Leone with an Australian girl presenting who'd worked for UNICEF there. No, not UNICEF, Amnesty International. And that was just gorgeous, because all these amazing fashionistas in Sierra Leone, in a country where a year before there was civil war and Ebola. Yeah. And it's just, it's about the joy of art and what that can bring, and how art can seep into even the most kind of terrible spaces. And then we've just done another one about slam poetry all across Australia, and we're kind of looking at diversity in a big way on the ABC at the moment. So all these kind of different faces and voices, but through poetry. So that it is a great space for experimentation. And I think, I think there's an expectation on me to innovate, but also that I'm expected to deliver mainstream content to the channel as well.
Yeah, that's kind of all of you, isn't it? Having to work both those sides. So one thing that I was interested in was everyone's kind of talked a bit about kind of things that they think are successful, or have been incredibly successful. I wondered if you could each just speak very briefly about something that hasn't quite hit the spot, hasn't quite worked.
Well, we all hate doing it.
First question.
We all hate
It makes everyone feel better, though.
No, and it's also kind of because somebody made that, so it's awful to kind of pinpoint something that didn't work, because they probably wasn't their fault, So.
No, but... No.
What doesn't work? I mean, oh God, what doesn't work? I don't know. I tend to forget the things that don't work and move on, and kind of you just have to kind of learn from it. And I suppose if things don't work, you have to understand why. Sometimes it's a bad commission. Sometimes it's just you shouldn't have commissioned it. It was a bad commission. So the people who made it made their best they could, but it was just sometimes you're unlucky. Sometimes you're ahead of the curve. I mean, for all sorts of reasons, things don't go right. But in a way, an arts channel is probably the most forgiving place ever.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I try not to dwell on things that don't work.
Yes, and also I think you can take more risks in the arts. I mean, it's
you
about
have
what
to,
you can
so
get
you
away
have
with
to
as
kind of
well,
fail
and sometimes that doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's sometimes the experiment goes wrong.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I try and get away with as much as I can, because it is the arts, and you can justify a lot in the name of arts and culture.
Yeah.
And if we're not doing it, who is going to do it?
Yeah. Well, that's what Grayson's saying up there, isn't it? That was his main message, was you've got to take risks. That's like the only...
I mean, for us, a lot of the things that don't work just don't make it to air, to be completely honest. I mean, there's if you're trying to make a punt on... I mean, there's our biggest project for next year. I've got no idea whether we're going to be able to do it, and I can't talk about it yet for that reason.
Yeah.
And I sort of think there's a really weird. When I got to 4, Ralph Lee is now the deputy chief creative officer and my boss. said, look, we'd much rather you sort of had some big hits and some catastrophic failures than a run of medium-sized successes. I totally didn't believe him. I was like, yeah, right. Everyone
You
says
say
this,
that now.
right? And then I really did screw up something quite badly that sort of didn't make it. And he just took me to a little room and said, it's really good you went for it. And I just thought, oh my God, he means it. You know, so there's a sort of properly, that's the culture.
Yeah.
But I think basically, if they're terrible, they don't tend to get broadcast, basically. So there's nothing visible of the cock-ups, hopefully.
I mean, we did a whole season about failure.
Yeah,
precisely
well, that's
for that
what-
reason,
yeah,
which actually
it's
we're
a great
a real
idea,
success.
I think. Yeah.
But you know, we were a bit like, is this sort of, have we sort of deliberately put a bear trap in front of us because we're doing a series about failure? But it's just an interesting question, and some of those got loads of attention, and some of them none at all. It's the mix.
Yeah.
I think, I think there are things you do that you know aren't going to get a big audience, but it's
worth
part of the
doing.
remit, and that it's worth doing it, and people really appreciate it. We live streamed and put to air Max Richter's Sleep just before I left, and it was 8 hours of performance overnight. That's probably why I got away with it, because had it been in the daytime, no.
We're just about to do something. We're doing the whole of Wagner's Ring from Beirut in Germany, and it's just like going to be mainstream Wagner. It's like, well, how many people are going to watch that? I don't know, but the people who will watch it will be in heaven, and it's about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Performance on TV is a very different experience from performance when when you've got Ken Branagh on these very boards, and it's never going to be as big. But the people who love it really love it, and we should do it. And when we do it, we should do it with conviction. And I think some of the things that don't quite work are often the things that get slightly knocked out of shape by trying to make them broader than they would necessarily be, or sort of. Sometimes it's not giving people the. Having enough faith in the people who are making things, and sometimes I think interventions from the likes of me don't necessarily make things better. I mean, let's be honest. It's you can sort of push people towards traditional television when in fact they might be making something that's different and never going to be enormously sort of watched, but feels like it's true to itself. And I think sometimes that's what we should be aiming for.
There's an amazing Charlie Brooker sketch I remember from years ago about what happens to your idea in the development process. Right?
Yes, I remember.
Your idea is a person, and by the end, it's a really like bright-eyed, enthusiastic person. And by the end of it, they're like got a lampshade on their head, they're wearing a tutu, and they sort of like stand doing a handstand. And you sort of think that's what we have to avoid. All commissioners should have to watch that sketch again and again and again and again until they sort of get it, basically.
And which programmes are you jealous of that have been made by other people, just in the whole?
What, in the arts?
Arts programming, yeah.
I don't know, it's an interesting question. I mean, Grayson's obviously a great talent. I loved the series about Chinese art. I thought that was, although that was, that was very very straight, traditional, but it was beautifully executed. So I think those are both great shows.
Sure.
I mean, there's a lot I like, but I'm jealous in the sense of
not jealous of anything.
Yeah. I mean, like, sort of, not because I'm being prissy about it. I just think sort of, if it's elsewhere, we probably wouldn't. We try not to do it. But I mean, I think Computer's show was. I mean, I went to the show as well.
Yeah.
Both were brilliant. I think landscape and portrait artists are fantastic. I think your opera looks incredible. Looks brilliant. The Hutchins film sort of got me here in a tiny clip. I've talked about that, the Valdemar, the Hockney film, the Freud film. I mean, there's sort of there's some brilliant stuff out there. It's just probably not what we would do, and if it is, I shouldn't be doing it. So this is sort of like it doesn't really work as jealousy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mark,
I think I probably, I think all the things that everyone's mentioned there are all things of quality that I'm glad exist where they do. And in a way, being jealous is sort of missing the point. I think actually what Celia said about, the tape making its own films and so on. That's great. That's great for people who love art. And I think actually sometimes we may want to take some of those things and put them on the BBC just to let more people see them. Sometimes they happily exist where they are, and that's great. And so actually, I don't feel sort of. I feel mostly pleasure when I see other people's good work.
I mean, I'd like to. I mean, Mark and I have done lots of co-pros together, but I'd love to do co-pros with Celia and John, and I've been
Yeah.
trying to crack John since
Then I would be
got
jealous.
into this job.
Love
Days,
co-pros.
don't
We've got a meeting later with them.
I mean, the joy of being, you know, arts projects need co-pro. And I think that's interesting. I think one thing that we've been spending a lot of time doing is that, you know, the indie community, I think there's sort of a sense that the arts are kind of low funded and sort of on the fringes. And I think that's sort of inculcated a kind of a lack of adventure and spirit in the ideas they're pitching. And I think actually, you know, Computer Stage Show was a really big show, and you know, and we all took a massive risk on it, and it was very scary at times. And you know, landscape, it has scale, and I think sometimes I sort of worry that the sort of the art world in terms of producers have been sort of slightly kind of crushed by the austerity of that. And I think actually you just need to fight back, because if you come with really big, exciting ideas, all of us are going to embrace that, and we'll find the money for them. So I think that's another challenge that we have, is to try and encourage people to kind of come with really big mental ideas. And not sort of such traditional kind of, you know, we couldn't do that, it's too expensive. It's like, no, think of these crazy ideas that are expensive, and somehow we'll find the money. And co-proing is part of that story. And the joy is that we all like what we're doing, and we want to help each other. So there's a kind of an openness. I mean, you know, Sky Vision is part of our distribution arm. They've created an art buying club, where they've actually got all the buyers across Europe to kind of get together. So when there's something that needs money, we can talk to them all at once, rather than the producer having to sort of schlep around to everybody. So it's about being smart about that, because I think, you know, we can do amazing stuff, but we all need to sort of help each other with funding and distribution things.
I'll tell you what I do feel really jealous of, and that's when I see a show or a piece of work by someone out in the, you know, beyond television. I think, oh, we could have done that with you. You know, there's a sort of that moment.
Yeah.
And I mean, for us, it's unbelievably simple, because the strategy is what it is. So we sort of, you know, if there's anyone out there who's a producer who wants to know what we're after, like, I would really love to be brought fantastic talent that wants to make work for TV. And occasionally I see fantastic talent and you think, you could do something, and I just haven't got around to them, and they've done their work already. And so that's the moment when I sort of, you know, gnash my teeth. But then hopefully I sort of tend to go and try and talk to them. Sometimes it's too late, sometimes it's not.
I think it's amazing how Grayson has become a brand for Channel 4. You know, and he's been nurtured. And Grayson had done lots of stuff before. He'd done stuff for the BBC, but Channel 4 really made him their own, and kind of, he is a spokesperson for the brand. He's the face of for the channel. He's the face of the channel. And each thing he does kind of reaches out into another sphere of, you know, I mean, it's a kind of hybrid that Grayson does, isn't it? He's looking at
honestly,
class, masculinity.
It's lovely of you to say that, but I mean, it's Neil Crombie and Joe Evans and Swan and Grayson himself who've worked that out together, and they've sort of taught me this strategy that we now have of artists doing things in the world. They're an incredible team. They've got this really brilliant creative chemistry, and they're willing to keep pushing themselves with each new series. So I mean, they're like all the best things. It's got very minimal intervention from me. They're a total joy to work with. So thanks.
Well, just since you were just talking about maybe talking to people about what you were looking for, I think we're going to open things up for questions now. So I don't know if we can have the lights up, possibly.
Oh, my God.
That's it. And if people have got questions, if you could just put your hand up and wait for a microphone to get to you, that would be great. Anybody?
I just wanted to ask a question about audiences, because it's clear that the different arts approaches are very different. So, and I know what to pitch to Mark and what to pitch to Channel 4, what to pitch to Celia, and you've displayed and shown very different programmes. But is it the same audience? I know that the channels have different profiles, but I'm just wondering whether actually it's the same people. That, you know, that Channel 4's arts audience is actually quite similar to the BBC's arts audience, and maybe to Celia's. Are we actually serving the same audience in different ways, or are we succeeding in actually finding very different audiences? Do we know who's watching our programmes?
Yes, not entirely, but yes, we do to a large extent. And I think that there are quite a lot of, I think the audience is shared between the Channel 4 arts audience, the Radio 4 arts audience, the BBC 2 arts audience, and to some extent, you know, and actually the BBC 4 arts audience too. I think, yes, there are avid consumers of cultural programming, and they will seek it out. When you either are making, I'd like to be making more programs on Radio 1, because then I think we'd be getting a different audience. We'd be skewing younger, and we'd be finding, and as Radio 1 becomes, has its sort of visualization bit, I think that's a really interesting territory where we would find new people who like culture, but in a different type of culture, and I'm really intrigued by that. I think, certainly we've made inroads into an audience that wouldn't describe themselves as arts lovers on Sunday nights on BBC One, and I think the fact that it's 4 or 5 million instead of the traditional sort of 1 to 2, or 500,000 to 2, is indicative of that. So I think we know who they are, and I think we've done quite a lot of audience research on that, and I think there are ways of growing it, and I think we have to be careful not just to super serve that sort of arts, people who already are arts interested.
John, have you got
I say what he said. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I sort of broadly the same. I don't know. I've never done any comparative work on who watches Sky Arts and Channel 4.
I think they probably are, but I think the question is, how do we get new audiences? I don't mind where they, obviously I want them to watch us all the time, but obviously it's a bit like, I suppose if you're a petrol head, you're probably the same audience that watches, I don't know, well, actually, that's a bad analogy with Top Gear, maybe I won't go there. I don't know, I don't know why are you asking that question?
I suppose because you've got very different strategies and you make very different programs, and as I was saying, I know what to pitch to John and what to pitch to Mark and what to pitch to you, but I'm just wondering whether we're making different arts programs, but if it's the same people watching them, I was wondering what that says about who we're serving and who we're not serving.
I mean, I think in a way we're all reaching beyond we know that, don't we, there's a core arts interested audience, and we're all finding different ways to sort of get beyond that. I mean, so it's the BBC One stuff in Mark's case. In our case, it's some of the random acts stuff. There's a Pega Farahman who runs that strand, came in from 10 years at Vice. She knows that, so that is definitely a different sort of cohort of people. She knows that audience there. She reaches them in a totally different way. There's a sort of, what I worry about is you've got to be aware of that. If you aim very, very specifically at particular demographics in the audience, you end up with something quite small. And as I say, I sort of think in a world of choice, atomization, and sort of multiple niches, what broadcasting needs to do is stay broad. So I sort of think it's one of those things, it's like something to bear in mind, but not the sole focus of our activities.
But also I think there's a sort of sense when you talk about the arts audience that somehow you sort of imagine them with their sort of Marks and Spencer's picnic blankets and what have you. But, the people that come to Sky Arts to watch the heavy metal documentaries, those are people in search, they're culturally hungry. The fact that Deep Purple might not be deemed as valid culturally as opera is kind of what the problem is. And I think that is for me is kind of the crux of audiences, is actually treating and serving everybody who's culturally hungry, whether they want to watch a program about punk or whatever, as the same quality of viewer that demands the same respect and also the same quality of offering. And I suppose that's the task for us all, is to kind of treat everybody across the spectrum as validly as the sort of the more high-end spectrum of the viewers. And also and young people. And you don't only have to look at the numbers of people going to concerts and live music and live performances. It's just like exponentially going up. So the trick is, how do you get them from making the move from experiencing art to actually watching it? And I think that is a sort of a challenge for all of us, really.
Any other questions? Sorry.
Hello, thank you for a very interesting session. I'm a Norwegian producer and I produce art films, among others. So I'm wondering, to what extent do you do acquisitions, or do you prefer to do co-commissioning or co-productions?
We have an acquisitions team, and we acquire a lot, because it's a 24/7 arts channel, so we need lots of stuff. I'll give you the person to email afterwards.
We don't do much because of the particular nature of what we do. Not a lot of other people are doing that kind of film. But the nice thing about acquisitions is you know what it is. So if you let me know what it is, I'll try and give you a quick answer.
We acquire 20 a year for TV, and a lot more for the Arts iView channel, because, it has to be, again, it's 24/7 and it's got to be populated, and we're looking to kind of curate we have different themes every month, so we do buy a lot of arts programming?
Likewise, we buy quite a lot of long docs that might have had a festival circuit or a brief cinema release. We're looking for, obviously looking for the things that might break through, and quite often we might sit on something for a while until we find a season or theme, sort of put them together to make some kind of theme or season. We've got a Peggy Guggenheim acquisition coming up that we're playing in alongside some programs we've made about the art market. We'll try and find a way of giving it a bit more purpose, because otherwise you end up with just putting them out and it's quite hard to get any kind of, build any sort of awareness of it. So that's what we mostly do. We do some co-pro as well, both with Mandy, and we'd think about doing them elsewhere. Obviously Storyville does a lot in the docs area, and Kate Townsend, who works on Storyville, also works with me, and she's often around on the circuit, and we'll look for things that we might want to participate in.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I've really enjoyed the Slow TV initiatives, which I think has mainly been led by the BBC last year. Has there been any intrigue or discussions about maybe bringing Slow TV to the arts area?
Well, we've done a bit already. We've made quite a lot of the Handmade series was made by the arts department, and we're watching somebody, sort of making a glass vase or a knife or something. So I think enjoying skilled people making beautiful things is something that can be very seductive. I think it's important. It's sort of interesting. It sort of feels like it's quite retrospective in a way. It reminds you a bit of the Potter's Wheel, but in a good way, I think. I love it, but it feels very true to BBC4. I wonder how big you could make it, and we're always interested in other ideas in that territory. But I think it's not going to take over the channel.
So, I love it. I love watching it. I think it's really hard in peak on 4. We've got I wouldn't describe this as slow TV, but the John Gerard piece that we're doing next year is an artist who's made a digital simulation of a landscape, Spindletop, Texas, where the oil was first discovered, and the work lasts for a year. So it runs for a year.
That's really slow.
Super slow. And it's exact replica of the landscape, and it's modelled to sort of include the movement of the sun, the changing of the seasons and everything. So any moment you look at the work, that'll be what's happening in Spindletop at that time. So when it gets dark, etc., etc.
It's like Minecraft.
Yeah, it's a bit like Minecraft. And he uses gaming technology to do it. He uses people who build game worlds to do it. And it's completely captivating work. And what we're going to do with that is it'll run online, and then it'll punch into the schedule in the gaps between programs all the way through the day. So I just think that if you think imaginatively, there are probably different ways of doing it, basically.
Max Richter was like slow TV.
Yeah, that's
You could take it to bed with you and go to sleep with it.
We also
I did.
We also did a 24-hour arena cut of sort of arena's been running for, is it 40 or 50 years? I've gone blank now. And Anthony Wall put together a 24-hour arena, sort of arena day and night. So all the bits of arena that were in the morning or in the evening were cut into a 24-hour experience. And you can log on to the BBC Arts website and watch it. And,
Is that on the Space as well?
It was on the Space, yeah. I think it's on.
We have a really massive on-demand arts offering. I'm sure there's some stat I should know. I think it's Europe's biggest on-demand offering. I don't know. Something, anyway, it's big. And so that is a really interesting space to do things like that. And so we actually have every day you get a new painting with it's like a 5-minute offering, and it's on a loop. So you can have the painting as your screensaver on your television or your laptop. But it also comes with like a 5-minute sort of basic art history lesson about that piece, and that's just there all the time. And so on demand is quite an interesting way of actually sort of doing content in a different way that you can punch in and out of, or that people want to experience in a longer form. But we also do lots of short form there. So on demand is a really sort of interesting space, and we can kind of editorialize all that content and mix and match it. And you can obviously, whenever you want, you can download and experience that work.
Right, I think we've got to wrap up there. So just want to say thanks to everybody. Thanks for coming. Thank you.